Hey folks, the time is now 7:05, so I'm going to go ahead and get us kicked off here. For the people who don't know me, my name is Commissioner Patrick Parlej. I am the ANC Commissioner for 6E05. That's mostly encompasses the Mount Vernon Triangle area, most of the Mount Vernon Triangle area. I want to thank everyone here for joining us tonight. I know that discussing neighborhood issues maybe isn't the most interesting thing to be doing at 7 p.m. on a nice day in DC, but it speaks volumes that folks from the neighborhood are here and listening and engaging and doing their part to make sure the neighborhood is the best it could be. And so the reason that we're having this meeting is because the MAGLEV project, which is and you'll hear a lot more about it soon, but this magnetic levitation train is being proposed, and many parts of the station are going to be around our direct neighborhood. Some parts of this project are going to be built directly in our neighborhood. And I want to make sure that myself, the constituents here, that we have as much information as possible as we're thinking about weighing whether or not the MAGLEV project is a good thing for this neighborhood or a bad thing for this neighborhood. Whatever way you look at it, whether you support the project, you don't know much about it, or you oppose it, the MAGLEV project will have a significant impact on our neighborhood if it goes through. It's just important to be weighing the costs and the benefits of that project. So for those who aren't super familiar with the ANC, ANC 6E, which is a collection of a total of 7 commissioners like me, will vote on a proposal, a sort of commission-wide proposal on whether our comments on the MAGLEV. And as part of the MAGLEV process here, we have the opportunity to comment on their draft environmental impact statement. That's something you'll probably hear a little bit more about tonight. We'll be able to file our comments sort of on behalf of the neighborhood for that project. Just a few ground rules for tonight. The first thing is that this meeting is being recorded, both audio and video. So keep that in mind if you're asking a question. The reason that this is being recorded is that we're going to try to weigh in on the neighborhood level, but this is a project also being concerned by the office of the mayor and the city council. And so they might benefit from actually being able to rewatch the footage from this video to understand directly where the neighborhood comments and concerns are about the project. So that's something that I'll transmit to them, and I may upload online as well. The second thing is that, we hear all kinds of crazy stories about horror stories with Zoom, people going nuts, people who aren't invited or don't have anything productive to say coming in and being disruptive. There's no, I reserve the right to sort of, if there's anything inappropriate going on, you'll be removed. And so by way of agenda, I've invited the MAGLEV team here today. You'll see Ian and Steve there. They'll have about 30 minutes to present about the project. I've sort of, before this meeting, told them a few things that we are really interested in as a neighborhood, including this building that is proposed to be built inside of our neighborhood. That's something we care a lot about. So they'll have about 30 minutes to present. And then they'll be followed by public, community Q&A. I'll ask a few questions. Folks in the community will have a chance to ask a question or make a comment about the project. And then, we'll sort of see how that goes. We'll maybe wrap up around 8 or 8:30, depending on how many questions folks have. So that's kind of my vision for the way ahead here. So without further ado, let me go ahead and ask Ian to unmute. And Ian, can you share your screen? Are you able to do that?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Can you hear me, by the way?
I can. Yep.
Great. Okay. Hopefully my screen is visible now.
Yep, I can see it.
Great. Okay, well, thank you, Commissioner. Really appreciate it. Very happy to be here and present on the MAGLEV project and answer some questions. I'm joined by Stephen Marcus, my colleague. And what I'd like to do is run through some slides. I'll keep it to 30 minutes. This is a lot of these slides are slides that I think the Commissioner, you've seen some of these before, not all of them. Other folks on the call may have seen some of these, but you very kindly provided some kind of advance notice of questions or issues that are particular concerns. So I've included within the slides kind of call out boxes where we can sort of zero in on those areas that you said were especially of interest. So let me dive right in. My name's Ian Rainey. I'm Senior Vice President with the Northeast MAGLEV project. The Northeast MAGLEV is proposing to bring this very unique transportation technology to the Northeast corridor of the United States. This is actually an image, a photograph of the system. It operates currently in Japan, in Yamanashi Prefecture. That's the initial operating segment. And the company that operates it is now extending that initial line to connect Tokyo and Nagoya. But what I would like the takeaway to be just from this cover slide is that this is a real train. It is an existing system. It's not a concept. It's not a prototype. It's not in development. It has been fully certified by the Japanese government. Hundreds of thousands of people have ridden it. It's traveled millions of miles. The EIS for the extension in Japan has been completed. So this is a proven system. It's not a hyperloop. It's not a concept or a prototype. Let me just say a few quick words about who we are. We as kind of a couple different companies on the private side. I'll talk a little bit more about how we're working with the federal government and the state and district government on the project. But on the private side, the first company I'll explain is Baltimore Washington Rapid Rail, BWRR for short. You might see this name in the press. This is a 100% US owned company. I emphasize that fact simply to make clear we're not a kind of Japanese front company or something like this. We're 100% US owned. We have a franchise, a railroad franchise in the state of Maryland. That's a prerequisite for operating a railroad in the state of Maryland. It does not extend to the district. It's separate laws and requirements, but we are franchised as a railroad in Maryland. We are the project developer. So we're the entity that will raise the financing, funding for the project, oversee the construction, the contractors, and then operate and maintain the system. Northeast MAGLEV is a very closely related company, but with a slightly different focus. As opposed to BWRR, which is the developer, Northeast MAGLEV does project promotion, so public relations, government relations, marketing, and the like. It also does technical consulting. And I just mentioned these two companies because the names appear in the press, and we often get questions about whether we're competitors or the same thing. We're, for all intents and purposes, the same group. We work very closely with Central Japan Railway Company, JR Central. It's the world's leading high-speed rail operator. If anyone on the call has been to Japan, there's a high likelihood you may have ridden a JR Central train. They operate the very iconic bullet train that goes from Tokyo to Osaka. It's actually the world's first high-speed rail system, commissioned in 1964. And it currently is the world's busiest high-speed rail system. Pre-COVID, it was moving about 150 million passengers per year. Since it's been in operation, since 1964, there's never been an accident or a fatality on that line. And the average annual delay per train on the JR Central line is 30 seconds over the course of a year. That includes earthquake events. So it's a really gold standard in terms of safety and reliability. JR Central decades ago realized that demand would exceed eventually the service and capacity on the bullet train. So they began development of the SC MAGLEV. And as I mentioned, the initial operating segment is already up and running in Japan and is now being extended. So our vision at a high level is to bring that great Japanese technology, SC MAGLEV technology, to the United States. The system operates at a cruising speed of 311 miles per hour. It's actually capable of much higher speeds than that. But for ride comfort reasons, it's limited to 311 miles per hour. And at that speed, we would be able to offer a DC to New York trip time of 1 hour, actually less than 1 hour. That would be inclusive of 2 stops along the way. Those would kind of be tailored to meet travel dynamics. So, for example, you could get on a train at 9 a.m. that would stop at BWI and Philadelphia, and 8 minutes later, you could board the next train, and perhaps that one would stop at Wilmington and Newark, and so forth. All the trains, though, would eventually go to the terminal station in New York. So for anybody who makes this trip with any regularity, whether you fly or drive or take Amtrak, I'm sure the notion of being able to do it in 1 hour is the transformational potential of that is obviously pretty significant. Recognizing this is a huge corridor, not just huge in terms of geography, but I think the political landscape is very complex. We're trying to address this project in phases, the first phase being Baltimore to Washington. At this speed, that would be a 15-minute trip. That would include a stop at BWI Airport. So, you know, if you're if you want to get to BWI and you leave your apartment or your home in Washington, D.C., you go to the MAGLEV station, you'll be at BWI Airport in 9 minutes. So even that, we think, is pretty revolutionary for the region. The major activity that's underway right now for this project, as the commissioner mentioned, is the environmental impact statement. I'm sure some folks on the call are familiar with this process, but for those who may not be, this is kind of the major federal regulatory process that any big project must go through if it crosses state lines, anticipates some reliance on federal funding or financing, anticipates some kind of federal rulemaking process in the future, or just has anticipated significant environmental consequences or impacts. So the environmental impact statement is currently underway for our project. It's led by the Federal Railroad Administration. And they recently published on January 15th a draft of the environmental impact statement. That is available now online. There were public hearings held for this. Possibly some of the folks on the call were able to listen in on those. Maybe someone gave verbal testimony, which is terrific. I would point out that certainly was not the only opportunity for comments. The comment period is actually open until May 24th. You can submit your comments online at this website. You can view all the project documents at this website. And the weight of written comments is the same as verbal comments. So I would certainly encourage people who are interested, please peruse the EIS. It's a dense document. It's over 600 pages plus appendices. So if you're wondering, gosh, where do I even start, or what are the significant portions, I'm more than happy to follow up with you on email to kind of direct you to areas that might be of interest. In terms of EIS responsibilities, just want to be very clear on this point. Some people think that we're BWR as the project developer, therefore we're kind of leading this EIS process. In point of fact, it is a government-led process. It's jointly led actually by the lead federal agency, which is the Federal Railroad Administration, and the lead state agency, which is the Maryland Department of Transportation. So the way it kind of works is we submit proposals for like station locations or facility locations or routes, all these kinds of things. And then those proposals are taken by the Federal Railroad Administration, and then they evaluate the environmental impacts of those proposals. And they have delegated that responsibility to an independent consultant, AECOM, who works under the direction of Maryland Transit Administration. You might be looking at this, I think, very reasonably and saying, that's a heck of a lot of Maryland. Where's the district in this? It is a MDOT-led process jointly with the federal government. The bulk of the project is in Maryland. However, I can assure you the district is very involved in the EIS, has participated in meetings, many meetings with the FRA, provided comments to various project documents in the past, is currently reviewing the EIS, and I would imagine we'll be submitting pretty robust comments on it. So DC is very much, I think, a part of this process. I can't speak, for them, whether they're, what their view is of it, but they are engaged. It's not solely a Maryland affair. So as I mentioned, the comment period will end May 24th. It'll take a long time, I think, for the Federal Railroad Administration to kind of combine all those comments and address them in the EIS. We would expect that process to wrap up, we hope, in early 2022. And then that kind of segues, allows us to segue into final design. And that'll really be, a very intensive time, I think, where we're developing our details of the station, of the alignment. That's also the period where we'll be developing our detailed construction plan. And I think it'll be, in that process where we will really start getting into the details of what does construction, what are the actual real specifics of construction, the specific phasing, the equipment that's going to be used, all the various mitigations that are going to be employed. So I guess that's my way of saying that although this EIS is definitely a major and very important step in the process, it is only a step. We're still pretty far away from construction. And I think this is probably an early dialogue of many that we'll be having as we get closer to construction. These are the two alignments for the project. They're primarily in tunnel, mainly to avoid impacts to urban areas, residential areas. In the middle section, you can see we are above ground. A solid line indicates areas where we're above ground. I won't focus too much on this because it's kind of outside the district, but I'm happy to answer questions about the sort of thinking behind these alignments. So we can return to this later in the presentation if you'd like. And now kind of drilling down into the district. Here's kind of the overall footprint within the district. As you can see, we are trying to get out of the district in a pretty much perfectly straight line. The great advantage of MAGLEV is the speed, the time savings that it offers. And a key component in that is our ability to accelerate as quickly as possible. So we really need to be coming out of the district in as straight a line as we can. That's one of the reasons we didn't kind of push for a station location in Union Station, because it would require a very severe angle to get out of the district underneath New York Avenue. You can see the station, and I'll zoom in even more on the station, is kind of down in the bottom left near the convention center. We're in deep tunnel coming out of the district. There's another facility a little bit farther to the east called an FAEE. It's a fresh air emergency egress location. This is where, in the unlikely event that there was a need to evacuate passengers from the tunnel, this is the location that we would evacuate them to. And we would also propose to site a substation there. So zooming in a little bit more on the station, here's kind of the concept, and let me really underscore that term, concept. Again, we're in the environmental review kind of stage of this. So, I think the point is these are ideas that are being put out there for feedback. Just let me I guess leave it characterized that way. But things can change, of course. But what we do propose at the moment is for the station to be underneath New York Avenue, starting just to the east of Mount Vernon Square. You can see the proposed station call out box there. That is actually where the platforms would be. The idea is that we would have two guideways on top and two guideways underneath those. So it would be kind of a stacked concept. So we could have 4 trains in there at any given time. There would be a switching chamber so the trains could get out onto the guideway and leave the station area. We also propose what we call a station head house. This is kind of the main area where you would go to purchase your tickets. There would be an information booth and so forth. We've kind of outlined here what the underground footprint of that would be. So I just want to be clear, we're not proposing shutting down. I think that's 6th Street. This is the underground footprint. We are proposing some parking there. I will talk a little bit more about parking. And in terms of other access to the station, we have identified some potential pickup areas for TNCs like Uber and Lyft, an existing taxi stand to the west of the convention center. And we would also envision a taxi TNC drop-off in the station head house itself, as well as a kiss and ride drop-off and pickup location within the station. One of the questions that got sent over earlier was that an earlier concept was to site the station head house at 1101 New York Avenue. What happened to that option? That was what we used to refer to as the Mount Vernon West option. What we realized when we started looking into it is that it would have required really extensive tunneling underneath some very, very significant existing infrastructure, including 2 metro lines, I believe a water line, as well as underneath the Carnegie Library, which would have required underpinning the library. All of those issues taken together just ultimately rendered that option technically infeasible for us. Another question, it was, why doesn't the SC MAGLEV connect directly to Metro? So just to be clear, it's very much in our interest and desire to connect to Metro. Those connections are outside of the scope of what's currently being looked at in the EIS. However, we are absolutely going to evaluate those in the future. We've already had some early discussions with WMATA about this. They're very intrigued by the idea. Metro connectivity for us offers a seamless travel experience from origin to destination, which from an economic perspective makes all the sense in the world for us. That is how we attract ridership by offering that seamless travel. And also it allows us to, bring in riders from the 3 major metro stations nearby. So again, I think this is kind of a next step, perhaps, after this EIS, but it is something that we very much plan to pursue. To give you a sense of some of the preliminary ideas that we've had, the nearest connection is to the green and yellow line at Mount Vernon Square, 7th Street Metro. We developed some early concepts for that. You can see one shown in this artistic rendering, but the idea would be to have kind of this cantilevered walkway through the convention hall that would allow you to get from the SC MAGLEV to the metro station. Other options that we would like to evaluate are, of course, Gallery Place and potentially even Metro Center, which is eminently walkable for the MAGLEV station. Another question, and I'll kind of talk a little bit more about this, but was there's going to be a massive influx of cars to the neighborhood. What are the mitigations for this? So I think the short answer is we can envision a couple of things that will mitigate this. One is that metro connectivity. I think that really is important. If we can offer that seamless connectivity to Metro in the future, it reduces reliance on auto to access the SC MAGLEV. So that's really important. The other point I would make is that the EIS does flag increase congestion around the station area, but it assumes present conditions. It doesn't assume changes in the future. So it doesn't assume things like signal optimization, signage, lane management, etc. It also doesn't factor in the fact that when MAGLEV is introduced, it will very significantly divert automobile travel onto the MAGLEV, and so there will be fewer cars coming into downtown DC. Again, I recognize these are not really specific, quantitative things. These are mitigations that are, potential ideas. But again, we will be working very closely with DDOT, the community, and other stakeholders to develop more detailed plans as this process advances. It's not in our interest, to have the area around the maglev station totally snarled with traffic so that nobody wants to get on the train. So it certainly behooves us to come up with a method to deal with it in coordination with the community. This is just a rendering of what that station head house might look like. I strongly emphasize this is just an artist's concept. It's not a fleshed out design. So it could look like this, it could look completely different, but the point is, we would want to design it in a manner that it fit in aesthetically and architecturally with its surroundings, and was pleasing to residents and visitors alike. Talk a little bit about the overall construction concept. Again, I strongly emphasize the preliminary concept. And the detailed construction plan, that's kind of what's developed after the EIS, when all the kind of basic decisions are made about, okay, here's the alignment, here's the facilities and so forth. Then we really drill down, develop the very detailed construction plans, figure out the very detailed mitigations and so forth. But let me make a couple high-level comments about what construction might look like based on what we kind of envision right now. One thing I would like to be very upfront with everyone about is that construction on New York Avenue between North Capitol Street and 7th Street Northwest is very likely going to require top-down excavation. Some people think, well, can't you just kind of tunnel using a boring machine under New York Avenue? Unfortunately, because of the way the equipment has to be installed and the switches, which are very large, because of the way they have to be installed, it does require us to excavate from the top down. The overall duration of that segment between North Capitol Street and 7th Street is 4 years. However, it'll be broken up and phased. So that entire stretch from North Capitol to 7th, that will not be under construction for 4 years. The idea is that we will break it up into 5 pieces or segments, and we'll work on 1 or 2 segments at a time. Those will be maybe a year, maybe more. But during that time, we're only going to be working on either one side of the street or the other side of the street. So traffic along New York Avenue will never be stopped. There will always be a way to get through. However, if there's a 2-block stretch that's under construction, there may be a period of time where there's only 2 lanes of traffic able to get through that construction segment. Again, there are a lot of other things that we can look at once we really get into those construction planning details, like very kind of specific working hours during the day, whether we may able, put metal decking above the construction area during times of very severe traffic and so on. Those are details that we would obviously have to work out with DDOT, with DCOP, with others. But there are, I think there are a lot of creative ways that we can minimize disruptions. Another question that we got ahead of time was, what specific plans does the MAGLEV team have in mind to mitigate resident quality of life frustrations and economic hardships endured by businesses during the extensive construction period? Again, we're still in an early stage, so I can't really lay out very specific mitigations. We're still kind of evaluating the impacts. But we will be developing this detailed construction plan, and that will, I think, be the document that really factors in all of these issues. How do we deal with parking during construction? There might be, I spoke with our residents of a building yesterday where there's a possibility, not a foregone conclusion, but there's a possibility that kind of based on how their building is kind of situated and where their access to their garage is sited, that there may be a period of time where their parking garage is inaccessible. So, what are some of the things that we could look at to mitigate that, very severe inconvenience to them? And, there are things like alternative parking nearby. We'll have lay down areas during construction. there might be a possibility of building some kind of temporary facility for people to park during that period of disturbance. We could try to work out, access to other facilities nearby that might have unused capacity. We might be able to, build temporary parking in lots around the city that are currently not used, but could be temporarily purposed for that reason. Noise, dust, debris. Again, there are ways to do this, and I don't want to sugarcoat it. Yes, there is noise associated. This is pretty intensive construction. We need to figure out ways to mitigate it. There are technical methods that we can do that. The way we dig these, excavate this station, it kind of happens in small pieces sequentially, even within the segment where we're digging down, pouring in what we call slurry wall. There are ways to kind of contain that, to minimize noise and dust and debris. Again, we can kind of figure out what the right construction hours are, so there's minimal disturbance to people during certain times of day. Our concept is not to do any construction at night. So those are just examples. Business economic impacts. There are businesses in the stretch of New York Avenue that will be directly affected. I think there are businesses perhaps that are even offset from New York Avenue that will be affected. The idea is that pedestrian access will always be maintained during any portion of construction. So even if construction is happening on a certain side of the street in a particular segment, and there's a business there, we will always maintain pedestrian access there. So that's, again, these are just early examples of things that we're thinking of. So a couple quick words about vibration and magnetic fields. People, of course, say, well, that's construction, but then, the train is running. It's this huge train. It goes 311 miles per hour, really powerful magnets. What does that mean for vibration? Honestly, even at 311 miles per hour, at a certain distance below ground, 30 feet, vibrations are completely imperceptible. And the reality is that within Washington, D.C., because it's a terminal station, the train will be really moving almost at a snail's pace. Probably by the time it's getting to the station, it's at like 1 or 2 miles per hour, and it's on rubber wheels. So there is no vibration above ground at all. And in terms of electromagnetic fields, the system meets all the exposure guidelines recommended by the World Health Organization. I'm sorry, a little hoarse today. They follow guidelines that are published by the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. And the tests for this were actually taken on site in Japan. There were government inspectors who confirmed the validity of the tests. There was extensive media coverage, and all of that data is publicly available, and I'd be very happy to share it with you. I'll talk a little bit about DC station access. You can see above, this is what our ridership forecast predicts for inbound and outbound traveler access to the station. So inbound, of course, these are people coming to the maglev, and this is the mode of travel they would use to get to it. Outbound is they're disembarking maglev and then using that particular mode to get to their next destination. There are limitations to these types of forecasts. Obviously, it's very hard, not really possible in all respects to predict the future. We use kind of very industry standard modeling. It's very sophisticated. We conducted in-person surveys. So we think the results of the forecast are very reasonable. They're very consistent with kind of industry. They conform completely with industry standards. However, we are now entering, what is hopefully the post-COVID world that will have an impact on travel dynamics, and there are certain things in the district that will change. I think there's a shift to bus, to bikes, to pedestrian, to scooter. All of those things, of course, have an impact on behavior. So, it's kind of my caveat for the ridership work. But we, of course, need to plan for a very, conservative scenario so that we really understand what are the most severe impacts. And so in that sense, I think it's kind of good that we looked at it the way we did. What we proposed in order, we recognize that 3,360 parking spots is probably a non-starter. We proposed about a third of that, of those customers be offered parking, subterranean parking in our station head house location. We have gotten a lot of feedback on that over the past couple months. I imagine some people on the call have very strong feelings about it. So we welcome that feedback. I think, this is how the process works. We've made a proposal, and now, we are hearing back from people how they feel about it. And I think the key for us is, figuring out what is the balance between meeting the needs of the local community, who very reasonably don't want jammed up streets with a bunch of automobile travelers accessing the MAGLEV, versus finding the balance for customers who are coming from points further afield and are relying on their automobiles to get to the MAGLEV. So the point is, it's a conservative look at potential impacts. It's a first step in a process to understand issues and concerns. And I think, there's a lot more thought goes into this going forward. I'm wrapping up, I promise. Just say a couple of points about project economics. As I mentioned, the ridership detail has been studied. The ridership potential has been studied in great detail as what we would call an investment grade ridership study. It is available online on the EIS website. I'm happy to share the link with you to that. We anticipate ridership will be more than 20 million people annually, which is really significant. And that's just between Baltimore and Washington. That number may seem surprising. Actually, what we found, when we did the study is that between Baltimore and Washington, we have actually some of the most congested roads in the entire country. And so there's a strong desire for a different mode of travel that could divert people from those very, congested highways. Another question we commonly get is the system going to require some kind of subsidy? To be very clear and upfront, we are absolutely going to be looking to the federal government to help cover the cost of construction through a mixture of federal grants and federal loans. We are not looking to the district to provide any funding or financing for the project. Once the system is up and running, we are very confident that revenues will fully cover operating and maintenance costs, so we will not require any kind of an operating subsidy. And ticket prices, there unfortunately has been some misinformation, frankly, about ticket pricing, and some, I think, very unfair talking points that I've seen about, the train is for very wealthy K Street lobbyists to be able to get to BWI in 9 minutes. That's a very unfair characterization. This is a train for everybody. Fares will vary based on time of day, and will be able to meet the needs, I think, of virtually all travelers in the corridor. They will be very competitive with Amtrak and other modes. Ticket prices could be as low as $27. Conversely, if you're a business class traveler at what we call the peak of the peak of rush hour, and you buy your ticket 5 minutes before your train departs to get to the airport, you will pay a premium for that behavior. And it could be steep. It could be $80 in some very extreme instances. But the idea is that we would have a variable pricing model. It's, it would cover a broad range of fares. Lastly, project economic benefits. This is an analysis that was conducted by the federal government, not by us, but their prediction is that construction of the project would result in 123,000 construction-related job years and 38,000 professional service job years. So that's one discrete job per year during the construction period. A very substantial number of jobs in the region, many of which would be in DC, and also very significant labor earnings to the tune of about 8.8 billion, which also, we think would have a very profound impact on regional GDP, especially in some of the communities along the route that I think are dealing with particularly severe economic impacts of COVID. That wraps up my presentation. I think I went about 10 minutes over. I apologize, but I wanted to go through it quickly and leave as much time for questions as possible. So please, I would invite any questions that anybody has.
Hey, thanks, Ian, and I appreciate you you touching on some of the points that I had sent over in advance. I think those are helpful. I think some of the questions probably will pertain to those. So I'll start off here and ask a few sort of general ones in addition to what you said. Could you first go back to the slide with the station house, kind of zoomed in on where the station house will be? All right, so this is on, I think this is 5th and New York Northwest, and to the right, right across the street, you've got Safeway, and going down across the street, that's the 7-Eleven. This is that big parking lot right now that's currently vacant. So this is the proposed station head house site. So I'll ask a few sort of related questions. Is the station, maybe I'm not familiar with what a station head house is. Is that sort of is it fair to say that's the main entrance to the station?
Yes, yeah. Yes, that's correct. It would be, this is where we would have the majority of, ticket machines, information, maybe there's some retail in there. That's a maybe future discussion. But this is kind of the main entry point, yes.
How big is that meant to be? And could you speak to number of stories, for instance? How high up is that going to be? What's that building going to look like?
Right, so the head house itself is, and again, we're still at an early stage, so this is really, very, caveat up front. This all is subject to change, but one could envision that the ground floor is kind of the head house area where you would come in, or at least part of the ground floor. I don't think we need, we're not trying to build, Grand Central Station or even Union Station here. We're envisioning something with a bit of a lighter footprint. So part of that ground floor is kind of the area where passengers will come, they'll buy tickets. There might be a tourist booth, information booth, things like that. Below that, is a combination of parking and some operational space. So things like equipment rooms, storage rooms, things like that. Above that ground level floor, we probably do need some additional operational space. We need some office space as well. And we're actually talking to the current property owner about, how we might be able to work with them, whether there are opportunities for this to be some kind of mixed use site where there's, even maybe residential or office space above the MAGLEV station. So I think all those details are to be worked out. But the head house itself is, we're probably talking kind of part of that first ground level.
Okay. And I just want to say, Chris, I do see that your hand is raised, and I will circle back in a little bit here. One more question. So it's actually on this slide, the Mount Vernon West location. Am I understanding correctly that is off the table completely now? And if yes, are there any other sort of alternate location sites that are being considered or might be considered depending on what the resulting comments of the DEIS are?
Right. Yeah, the Mount Vernon West side is off the table. It just, unfortunately, because there was a lot to recommend that site. We really liked a lot of things about it. But the technical difficulty of getting underneath the green and yellow lines, which are kind of underneath 7th Street there, underpinning the Carnegie Library. There's also some infrastructure within Mount Vernon Square. critical infrastructure, it was not realistic for us to be able to get our tunnels under there. And furthermore, one of the problems is that we have to, the really challenging part of that location would have been installing the switches. We really have to install those from the top down. And the way that station was kind of laid out, those switches basically would have to go in where the Carnegie Library is. And there's just no really feasible way of doing that. Even underpinning might not have been feasible. So that site's off the table. There were other sites looked at. There was a site at Noma looked at. There were, I think, some very serious technical challenges with that site as well, including that it could have involved a possible major disruption to the existing Northeast corridor. It also was not close to really any metro lines or stations, with the exception of Gallaudet, which is the red line, of course. However, we spoke with WMATA. They advised us that that actually is one of the busiest segments of the red line. So if we were vectoring all of the MAGLEV passengers to Gallaudet, it could have easily overwhelmed that portion of the red line. So Noma was eliminated. Right now, this is the only station. There's, I mean, this and a no build option are the two options, play in the EIS.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I want to touch on the parking. So if you could go back to that slide that showed the projections for each mode.
Yep.
Right, so yeah, so at 1/3 parking, so that's about that's more than 1,000 parking spaces. Is that about right?
Yeah, within the EIS, there's unfortunately there's a little bit of a discrepancy, to be quite candid with you. Again, it's a very large document. I think the federal government is, it's just hard to keep it exactly right. But what I will tell you is, and maybe some of the people have perused the DEIS, they might pick up on this. The body of the DEIS itself, the part that was prepared by the federal government, evaluates a 1,000-car parking garage. In the sponsors memoranda, in the kind of buried in the back of the EIS, that's the material that we provided. We actually proposed in that material 250-car parking garage. So I think there's a lot of discussion sort of that has to happen to sort of figure out what's the right size. Maybe it's somewhere in that range between those two numbers. I'm not sure. But I think the idea was, the FRA, again, I can't speak for them, and I just want to emphasize that they always make me promise that I won't make any representations on their behalf, and it's very important that I not do that. But I think perhaps, they wanted to evaluate what's kind of the worst case, right? If these ridership numbers are correct, and there really is this need to accommodate all of these auto access MAGLEV passengers, what does that look like? And, if there is a 1,000-car garage, what are the impacts of that? So, I think what's really helpful is getting this kind of feedback and having the FRA receive comments on the EIS. And then, we kind of take it to the next level and figure out, is 1,000 cars, is the garage, is that right? And it might be right? Like we don't want to create a situation where we lowball it on the assumption that not offering the parking will disincentivize passengers. But then lo and behold, the traffic situation is even worse because you've got people coming to this part of the city, but there's inadequate capacity to accommodate them. So that creates congestion on streets and it overloads existing garages. So I think it's it can be a double-edged sword, and we really need to be careful. I think some people's gut reaction is, oh, no way, we can't have that many parking spots. And I appreciate that. On the other hand, not offering enough spots can create problems of its own. So, it's, I think it really needs to be thought through carefully.
Yeah, my comment on this is that I think that everyone on this call who lives in the neighborhood probably shudders at this fact, this 1,000-car proposal, I think, as do I. I think driving down New York Avenue right now, in going either direction is already a bit of a cluster, right?
Right.
And so imagining so many more cars on the road as a result of this, it's a lot. And I'll say this as well as just a comment. I do get the impression that the 1,000-car parking garage, in tandem with the lack of metro connection proposed in this initial DEIS, gives a little bit of an impression that this is not going to be, that the connections to other modes of transportation, I'm talking now about metro and bus, even bike, was not a high priority when crafting the DEIS. And there's a little bit more prioritization given to personal vehicles arriving, and that's sort of evidenced in my mind by the 1,000-car parking garage. So that's a comment I would make. That's something that I'll draft something as my comment on this, Commissioner. That's something that I'll definitely note as well, just for feedback.
Okay. No, I mean, that's good. Again, I can't really speak for the FRA, kind of, how they kind of thought through it or prioritized it. I don't think there was a conscious effort to sort of prioritize auto. I think it's just these EISs are highly complex. There's a limited budget to prepare them, and so they have to be scoped very carefully. And when you start looking at all the kind of detailed intermodal connections, it's just, you have to say, okay, at some point, this is what we're looking at. These are the impacts we're looking at. Those types of intermodal connections, that's maybe a subject for another discussion. So again, I take your point. Again, we're 100% behind connectivity to metro, and would love to see that. I think it's just, the scope of this EIS didn't include that. But yeah, I see where you're coming from.
I'll ask one more question here. I see people have their hands raised and they're eager to ask as well, and we're already getting close to 8 o'clock. The one question I have is, you mentioned during the I asked a question about, in the slides, about mitigations for construction related.
Yes.
And you mentioned that some more detail will be available when the construction plan becomes available. So I just want to understand, now we're in the DEIS phase. Supposing the project goes through to the next phase, when does the detailed construction phase come into play?
So I think, so the detailed construction plan, that final design phase, I would call it, begins after the EIS. So probably in early 2022 is when we really begin in earnest what we would call final design. That is not a super quick step, we're probably talking about a year, maybe more. The construction plan is part of that final design. That's, we would start working with a contractor to kind of figure out exactly what the specs are of construction. So, and then we have to get other permitting as well to move forward with actual construction. So I guess that's my way of saying there's kind of a long time here to work with you guys and DDOT and other stakeholders on this. I think where we really start drilling down into the details of what construction looks like is probably early 2022, once we have clarity on the EIS, because for the very simple reason, right, doing that kind of detailed engineering is very resource intensive. We don't know what's going to happen in the EIS, right? FRA could change their view on something, or, worst case scenario from our perspective would be a no build alternative. We don't want to get to a no build having just spent millions of dollars on engineering. So we're going to do some, I think, early, we're obviously going to continue our outreach to local communities. We're probably going to begin doing some studies like with DDOT on things like traffic and parking and so forth before the EIS is completed. But the really kind of heavy duty engineering final design probably starts after the final EIS, so in early 2022. And that's, I'd say at least a year-long process, if not more. And then we have to, get our final permitting and our financing in place. So, I would say probably a shovel doesn't go in the ground until about 2024.
Okay. So I'll open it up for the community now. I see 4 people have their hands up, so they're eager to ask questions. I'll remind everyone what I said about the recording and the fact that I could post this online. Some people are concerned about that. If you would rather just email me your feedback and shape how I'm thinking about this project, you can also do that. My email address is 6e05@anc.dc.gov. So you've got that option as well. I believe Chris was first with the hands raised, and anyone else who would like to ask a question, if you just go ahead and raise your hand, I'll try to get these in the order that they came in. So I'll unmute Chris here first. Sorry about that. I might have just muted you back right when you clicked it.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. So Patrick, first of all, thank you for having this forum. I think it's super important. So I have a very quick comment and then a question. So my quick comment is twofold. One, Patrick, I don't actually think that Ian answered your question about the potential maximum height, because I think he pivoted away from it, and I think the answer was basically a maximum build. So I would love for Ian to clarify, 13 stories. So I would love to hear a clarification of that if that's not what folks are looking for. Secondarily, I was actually an elected office holder myself at one point. I know that these kind of considerations are important. My concern has been so far that I don't understand kind of how we're rushing forward on what is a private project that will incentivize or benefit a private corporation. And, I heard Ian talk about misinformation and things he's concerned about. I've also actually heard from friends who have seen his sponsored ads about the project. I too support rapid mass transit. That's very important to me. I'm not sure I see this as the way to do it. And so I guess my question at the end of the day is, I have heard from multiple people, included other ANC commissioners, and I've also seen the DC Office of Planning has really expressed their concerns very strongly about this project. I hear you now talking about kind of the ways that you will around the edges think about connecting to mass transit, both at the macro level, if it's Amtrak or MARC, and also at the micro level as Metro. Why was that not something that if you're really concerned about getting people from DC to New York and kind of improving transit options and not just making money, why was that not an immediate consideration? Because I also hear you say that DC taxpayers won't pay for this, but I also pay federal taxes, so I'm not interested in giving away federal grant money to be something that would be better done at the local level. So why did you not write into the first plan how you're going to serve Washington, DC, Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York? And how are you really addressing that now? Because I'm not sure that's what I hear. I think I hear you saying we're just going to work around local mass transit options and hope that entities like the ANC or City Council can come up with options on how to make this better.
So thank you for that comment. I appreciate it. Let me maybe take it in the order that you posed those questions. Your comment about that I pivoted from the commissioner's question about the height of the head house. Let me just clarify. I think it hinges on how much operational space we need, to be honest with you, and that is a detail that will not be resolved until we're a bit further along in engineering. We might need 2 stories of operational space, and the rest of the building can be office. We might need 4 stories of operational space. I just don't know yet. We're developing conceptual designs for an EIS, but we're not we're not doing, a 30% design package yet. So I can't tell you how much operational space we would need at that particular facility. So that's how I would answer to that. In terms of that no thought is being given to how we actually improve transportation in the corridor, I hear you. I would respectfully disagree. A lot of thought has been given to it, and in fact, we're finding from our analysis that there's a demand for over 20 million people per year to use this system. Yes, metro connectivity is important. It is not the end all be all of intercity passenger rail. It is, I think, an important part of it. It's an improvement. It creates that seamless travel experience, and it's something we want to look at. But to say that we're not interested or haven't really been serious about, introducing a new transportation option, I think on its face just doesn't align with the facts that there's a demand of about 20 million people who want to ride this train, whether or not there's a passenger tunnel to a metro station.
All right, the next person in sort of the line there is Ryan. And if anyone else wants to ask a question, please go ahead and use the raise your hand feature and I'll get these in order.
Hey, Patrick, thank you so much for recognizing me, and thank you for having this important meeting. I guess I will start off by just piggybacking on Chris's comments. I mean, the first thing I would have thought of if I were thinking of building a train between DC and Baltimore would be connecting it to Metro Rail. I mean, the first thing I would have thought of and all you have to do is look at the existing train station. You have the red line going right into it. And I think that, Metro is one of the most important mass transit systems locally in DC, if not the most important. So having that, connected and in a real way, I mean, I would have thought build this station right next to a Metro stop so that people have immediate, easy access to get on the train. I mean, you already have a train station in DC with a Metro stop in it. And, so it would make a lot of sense to put it there. I've heard the discussion about why they don't want to put it at Union Station, but, my thought would be it would make for a much better stop to either put it at Union Station or, pick another Metro stop or build the train station near a Metro. And beyond that, just as someone that lives directly across the street from where this building is proposed being built, this train station, I get a really good assessment of the local traffic conditions. And right now they're pretty good because obviously coronavirus, unfortunately, has limited things a lot. But, if in front of my building on K Street, if 3 Uber Eats cars stop for, 1 or 2 minutes to pick up or drop off food, it will almost shut down K Street. And I've looked at the number of cars they're estimating coming in and out of there. And you're talking, I did a little bit of simple math, and it could be 40, 50, 60 cars every minute dropping off and picking up passengers or trying to go in there and park or find parking. But just a whole lot of dropping off and picking up by Ubers, taxis. And I'm thinking, gosh, if just 2 or 3 Uber Eats cars will stop traffic there, how in the world are we going to handle, 20, 40, 50 cars every minute throughout the day, and especially at peak transportation hours, could be even more during rush hour. So I feel like that there's been some things that, where, MAGLEV proposed this train station, but not a lot of thought was given to the surrounding community is going to be built in, how they're going to build it in an area where the traffic could actually be, mitigated, handled well, how they're going to connect it to Metro and public transit. So big deal, having less cars come, having less people get there by vehicles so that you'll actually, not have as many cars pulling up to it. But if you are going to have cars, you really need to think about, can this area handle that much traffic? And I mean, New York Avenue is totally a clogged corridor, one of the worst roads for driving in DC right now. And, before COVID, K Street and the areas around the convention center were already, kind of at traffic capacity. It's very difficult to drive through those places. So to add in, what would essentially just create this huge traffic jam. I'm not sure if it would even encourage people to take the maglev, because I'm thinking, well, geez, if I don't live right next to it, I've got to sit in a car in an Uber for 20 minutes in traffic, 30 minutes in traffic to get up to the station to get out. So I guess with those comments, my question would be, why were not other additional sites proposed? I know the Office of Planning has expressed concern that they wanted other sites proposed in DC as alternatives. It would be great, for a project of this scale, if other proposals were out there saying we could build it here, we could build it there, this is where it could be. So why were all those other options nixed, and why not, if those options didn't work, were not new options made so that multiple proposals could be put forward, so there would be options for people to think about? Again, Patrick, thank you very much for having the meeting. Appreciate it.
There we go. No, thank you. I really appreciate the comments. I mean, they're great comments. I mean, just to kind of go back in time, a lot of sites were looked at, and as I think everyone on this call knows, it's a dense city. There's not a lot of kind of open space, and we did look at other locations. I mean, there's kind of a finite number of places that you can sort of contemplate something of this magnitude in the district. We did look at Union Station. I'm not sure if the gentleman who asked the question heard my explanation for that earlier, but there are some kind of geometric challenges with getting out from Union Station. But the other challenge with Union Station is, as folks probably know, there is a new concourse going in. There's a new air rights development going to be going in Union Station. There's the potential in the future for Amtrak to do what they call their next gen system. We would have to basically get underneath all of that somehow, and that's virtually impossible for us to do. I mean, we kind of have to do a lot of our station has to be excavated from the top down, and so the idea of being able to build a maglev station underneath the Union Station concourse, the Northeast Corridor lines, the air rights development going in at Union Station, it's just not technically really practical for us to do that. It just couldn't work. We did look at other locations. We looked at Noma. We looked at an above ground station at Noma. That would have required us building a bridge across the Northeast Corridor, which almost positively would have required shutting down service on the Northeast Corridor for an extended duration, which, that's obviously a non-starter. We considered an underground station at Noma. That might have alleviated some of the disruption to the Northeast Corridor lines. The problem with that is that we felt that, and we continue to feel, that we simply would not be able to attract a sufficient level of ridership if we were at the location of Noma that was being looked at. We also looked at the Mount Vernon West location that the commissioner asked about, and there were technical obstacles to that. So, this is a long way of saying many other locations were looked at. It was just very apparent early in the process that they wouldn't work. And yes, we're very aware of the Office of Planning's view of that. However, someone made the comment before about, not wasting taxpayer dollars. Well, I don't think taxpayers want to waste money evaluating options that can't work. They're just technically infeasible. So I think FRA made, a reasonable decision to drop those alternatives from consideration. But again, it was their decision. It was not ours. And I appreciate the gentleman's comments, but that's kind of the background of how the process worked out.
All right, I'll go to Michael next. I think he was the next person there.
Thank you. So I have a comment. I am one of the people that are a strong advocate for this. I am excited to move into the future and definitely have that opportunity a block away from me. Is also exciting to me. I get I'm in a rare form. But Ian, you showed an image of a station front, and it appeared as though it was looking down New York Avenue, and you said it was just an artist rendering. Yes, that one. So that appears to be 6th and New York. And my comment for consideration, I know you have many things to think about, would be to keep traffic moving in and out of New York. So maybe the parking could be on New York. We just have nice bike lanes that people are getting used to on K Street. So we could consider pedestrians and bicycles on K Street. Cars on New York would be what I would think would be a better efficiency, as opposed to that glass kind of area where cars couldn't get into parking. Because I do agree that cars in the neighborhood would be a challenge, but if you can leave them on New York, I think that could be a good consideration. I might also suggest, have you thought about incentivizing or setting up at other metro stations parking, so people would then park metro to Mount Vernon station to then get there? For example, we could do it at the New York Ave metro station, put the parking out there, people can metro 2 stops or something and get there.
Yes, I mean, I would say all options are on the table, and I think it's going to take a lot of creative thought, to figure out how to make it work. But I definitely appreciate your comments, and please, we really welcome that kind of thinking, and appreciate your support for the system. Again, it's not in our interest to have so much traffic around the station that no one's going to go to the train because it's miserable to get to it. So we need to kind of work with you all, with DDOT, with other stakeholders to figure out how to make this work. And I think traffic will change in the city. It is changing as we speak. I mean, I've been living here for a long time in the area, and I used to live in the district. Now I'm in Virginia, but my office is very close to what you're looking at on the screen right now. I've seen traffic change a lot. I mean, people's behavior is changing. There's a much greater reliance on different modes, on bus, on metro, on pedestrian. And I think it will continue to change. And I think our traffic management in the city will continue to change, right? We use very little things like signal optimization, which is being adopted with incredible effect in other cities where, every single signal is calibrated in real time to actual traffic conditions. That can have a profound effect on traffic, rather than just having preset signals where it's just red, green, yellow, whatever, at certain intervals. If you can fine tune it based on actual traffic patterns, you can achieve huge efficiencies. I think the district is moving towards that, and we're going to see a lot more of that in the future, and that'll help too. But there's all kinds of changes that I anticipate we're going to see in the coming years that I think will really influence our thinking about how MAGLEV fits into this.
Thank you, Michael. I believe Gustavo was next, and I'm sorry if I'm messing up the order here a little bit.
Patrick, thank you. Ian, quick question about the impact statement. I'm just curious about the overall scope of the impact study. So, I mean, I know you mentioned specifically, I'm interested in the economic impacts, and you mentioned some big numbers, $8 billion. How does that translate into, so are those dollars specifically related to the construction project itself, or something else? And if so, what?
Yeah, so those numbers are based, so that, again, this is, the Federal Railroad Administration developed these numbers. I think they use very standard methodologies of, there's different types of projects. There's transportation infrastructure. There's other types of water infrastructure, blah, blah, blah. And there's kind of formulas that every billion spent on a particular type of infrastructure project tends to result in X number of job years and, this much in employee earnings, this much spent on material and so forth. And so based on the cost estimates that we developed for the cost of this project, the Federal Railroad Administration used that data as an input into their model. which produced these results. So roughly, give or take, the civil infrastructure cost for Baltimore, Washington will be between $8 and $11 billion. The actual rolling stock and some of the system components will be in addition to that. But this is only looking at that civil infrastructure. So for every $1 billion, and I'm not sure what they used as an input, probably the average of that range. And the estimate is that for every $1 billion, you produce a certain number of jobs that are either directly related to construction or professional service jobs like geotechnical, project management, legal, real estate, evaluation, engineering, design, and so forth. And that this is what they came up with. And the employee earnings is for all of these people engaged in these jobs, this is how much they will earn from the construction of the project.
Hey, thanks, Gustavo. I'll go to Claudia here next.
Yes, hi, thank you very much. I first want to echo my neighbor's comments earlier about K Street and the congestion that already exists on K Street, and as well as New York Avenue for that matter. I agree that any major, ingress, egress should 100%, it needs to be on New York Avenue. K Street is a one-lane street. It's not a major thoroughfare by any means. I mean, we're talking about putting a major piece of infrastructure in, quite frankly, a small wedge, relatively small wedge of the city. And that's really one of the things that I loved about why my husband and I bought here. There's definitely, as much as I love the concept of being able to get to New York in an hour, I'm extremely fearful for the infrastructure realities of that. So as I said, I echo my neighbor's sentiments. The only version of this that I could see being somewhat feasible is if everything is directly outside of the triangle. And then that's just a comment. And then my question is, I know that schedule needs to be evaluated based on the ultimate strategies selected, but can you give us a sense of, or a range but for completion to Baltimore and then completion to New York?
Yeah, so once construction starts, we estimate that DC to Baltimore will take about 7 years. Again, a lot of it really depends on the extent of tunneling. You saw I showed those two alignments early in the presentation. There is pretty significant difference in the amount of tunneling between one alignment versus the other. That's kind of a long pole in the tent in terms of construction because we use tunnel boring machines. They only are able to bore about 30 feet per day. It's a very time-consuming process. Obviously, the station construction itself is pretty complex. So 7 years may seem like a long time. I think for a project of this magnitude, it might actually be a bit aggressive, but that's kind of what we're targeting. So if we were to start construction in late 2023, 2024, which is kind of what I threw out there earlier, 7 years, plus a period of testing and commissioning at the tail end, early 2030s is when we would anticipate revenue service for Baltimore, Washington. DC to New York, I'm hesitant to throw out an estimate on that. It's very hard to predict. I think we need to, what I would say is, to a certain extent, Washington to DC serves as sort of a proof of concept. And my expectation would be that once we build it, there will be a very strong demand to extend it up the corridor as quickly as possible. However, we haven't done the kind of detailed analysis up the corridor that we've done on this particular market. We've done some, we've identified viable routes, viable station locations, and things like that. But we really, it's kind of at that feasibility level of evaluation. So I'm not really prepared to put a time frame on when DC, New York would open. But what I would throw out there, just as a point of reference, is that in Tokyo, or in Japan, Central Japan Railway Company is building their system between Tokyo and Nagoya, which I think is about 180 miles or something like this. They began construction in 2015, and they are planning to complete that. Entire construction and have it open for revenue service in 2027. So that's pretty quick, right, for a corridor of that length, Tokyo to Nagoya, in what amounts to 12 years, basically. I'm not saying we could do DC or Baltimore to New York that quickly, but if there is strong demand, if there's political backing for it, things, these infrastructure projects can move quickly. And I think the current president is clearly a supporter of infrastructure investment, and we support infrastructure investment as well. So I'd like to think we're kind of turning a corner in this country to actually invest in these types of systems. And anyway, I can't put a time frame on it, but I think once Baltimore, Washington is built, there will be a very strong desire to extend it to New York quickly.
Thanks, Claudia. I just want to say to everyone else, if you have a question you want to ask, you can go ahead and use the raise your hand feature on Zoom, and I'll get to you. If you're dialed in on a phone, you can use the *9. *9 will sort of raise your hand. So next up, I'm going to go to this to iPad.
Hello, my name is Ricardo Vernon, and thank you for this project. I'm very familiar with the JR trains in Japan, the Shinkansen and the MAGLEV, and they are amazing. They bring jobs. Imagine being able to be working in Baltimore, or living in Baltimore and working in DC, or even working in New York and living in DC. Right. It's an amazing project. I'm glad that finally in America we are talking about to catch up first world countries, that they are so advanced in transportation. And of course, that's going to be an impact in our area. My question is, have you considered to have the access from the 395, which is less than half a mile away from the area where the MAGLEV is going to be located at, tunneling, like a boring company that they are already doing those projects in Las Vegas from the airport to the hotels? So the cars, they don't have transit the city, they can go underground. If that's not possible, it is possible to tunneling from the station to the near metro station just for the people to walk, or to put an endless loop train like at the airports just to bring people from the station. I think that is doable, and today those companies like a boring company, they are like $1 million per mile. So it's something like I suggest that should be considered. And additionally, we're going to have a certain impact in our area. My concern is security. My concern is how the district is going to be involved, avoiding that a project of this magnitude is going to bring crime, homeless, 10 cities. And that's going to be really my concern, because we have seen a development in this area, but also the downside that is sometimes the city just has some areas that they call tolerance areas where they don't put too much attention, and other areas where they keep more safety. So I think that those conversations has to happen at the same time that we are talking about that development, that they are beyond traffic. I'm more concerned about safety and security in our neighborhood than traffic.
Understood.
Those are my comments.
Thank you, Ricardo. I appreciate it. And I appreciate your comments about the trains in Japan. I've ridden them as well. I've ridden the MAGLEV. It is an amazing experience. And it's, once you, I think, have that experience, it really makes you wonder why we can't do something like that in the United States. So I'm with you 100% on that. In terms of your comments about the boring company, we haven't really had any engagement with them. My understanding actually is that they abandoned their plans, or well, I shouldn't say they abandoned their plans, but they did have a plan to do some smaller bore tunnels for automated vehicles between Washington and Baltimore, but they kind of removed all of that proposal from their website. So I'm not sure where that where that figures right now. They did talk a lot about how cheap it was to construct their tunnels, and it may well be. The thing is, our tunnels are considerably bigger. We actually have a single large bore tunnel for 2 trains to pass through at the same time, and we have to do that for aerodynamic reasons. We can't just have the trains traveling in small bore tunnels. So boring a very large bore tunnel is much more expensive. So the kind of technologies that I think the boring company is developing, which I think are, fantastically interesting. Unfortunately, I don't think there would really be an application to what we're doing on that. And as far as 395, I'm not totally sure I understood your question, Ricardo. What I can tell you is, to the extent that we have looked at 395, what we have attempted to conceptualize is how to ensure that access to 395 from New York Avenue is maintained even during the construction period. We don't want to create a situation where there's no way to get onto 395 from New York Avenue. So we have some concepts for that, of course, at the discretion of DDOT, how that's ultimately implemented, but that's what we've looked at vis-a-vis 395.
Hey, thanks, Ricardo. So I see Chris's hand is up. I know he already asked a question. If anyone else, is there anyone else out there who would like a first chance here? I'll give everyone just a minute. If not, I see that the time is 8:30. If not, I'll give Chris one more opportunity to ask a question and Ian to respond, and then we can call it for the night there.
Great. And I'm happy to come back. No problem.
Thanks, Patrick. Again, thanks for having this forum. I just wanted to kind of conclude with, with my observations quickly from the evening. I don't understand where the impetus for this project is. I do not feel like the questions that we as kind of a community have asked have been satisfactorily resolved. I still haven't heard about how tall the head house would be built. I still don't understand, again, as a federal and local taxpayer, why this project that is, would benefit a private company is being presented as the only forward-looking option. I agree with Michael and others that I am super excited about the idea of being able to get to New York in an hour. I'm not super excited about the idea of that taking until 2030 just to get to Baltimore, probably 2040 and beyond for it to be to New York. And, I guess it's on all of us to figure out what that means for our property values and economic justice and traffic in the meantime. So I'm a little worried about the way that this project, not by you, Patrick, but by MAGLEV as a private corporation that's looking to make money, is pushing this and kind of couching it as the only option. Ian just mentioned the fact that he doesn't understand why we can't be forward thinking like Japan. Secretary Buttigieg have just put forward a massive infrastructure package. I don't know whether this included in it. I feel like this is the only option. I feel like it is ill thought out. It does not connect to existing mass transit. It is not more cost effective, whether it's as cost effective or not. And that seems to be up for debate as a trip to Baltimore, much less New York. And it's not getting any Washington, D.C. to New York in the long term. So it sounds like a boondoggle that is going to inconvenience people who live in this area for multiple decades to come and is being, ramrodded through. And I'm really concerned. And I wish that, the DC Office of Planning had been on tonight, because they put out, I think, a pretty significant paper on their grave concerns with this project and their grave concerns with the way that the project moved over Union Station. It's not our responsibility as neighbors or elected officials to get to yes on a money-making project. It's our responsibility as neighbors and elected officials to say, here are the real impacts on a community that your project would have. We would love to have this kind of mass transit option, and this does not seem to be getting us from X to Y in a reasonable way. So I appreciate your time.
Okay, no, thank you, Chris. I respect your comments and your opinion. I mean, I'll respond. You said you don't understand the impetus for the project. I would I would offer that, currently some of our rail infrastructure on the Northeast Corridor is over a century old. It's in desperate need of repair. Amtrak is trying to get it to a state of good repair. There are some, modest improvements being made along the Northeast Corridor and some new rolling stock being introduced. It will travel not much faster than the current Acela travels. And, by any international standard, that is not high-speed rail. We live in the densest, most economically vibrant part of the country, and we do not have anything approaching true high-speed rail in the European or Asian sense of that term. There is no other proposal currently to offer a better mobility option on the Northeast Corridor. That's not our fault, but there simply is no other proposal. Amtrak is focused on safety and achieving that state of good repair. They are not focused on high-speed rail or introducing a new transportation option or a high-speed transportation option. So, I don't know. You say you don't know why this is the only forward-looking option. It's our proposal. We think it's a great one. We're talking about bringing the world's most cutting-edge generation skipping technology to connect our nation's capital to our nation's financial center. We think that is very forward looking. And it doesn't appear that anybody is signing up to do anything like that. So, we think it's a very compelling option. Other impetus for the project, we have some of the worst congestion in the country between Washington and DC. Our infrastructure is over 100 years old. Half of all the flight delays on the Northeast Corridor originate somewhere on the Northeast Corridor. Half of the flight delays in the entire country originate somewhere on the Northeast Corridor. So I think there's a tremendous impetus, and there's a huge annually billion-dollar cost of doing nothing. We waste over $4.5 billion every year just sitting in traffic between DC and Baltimore. So I respect your opinion. I would disagree that there's no impetus for a project like this. And in terms of the head house, I'm sorry if you don't think my answer was satisfactory. I can offer that it'll depend on how much operational space we need. I don't know if that's 4 stories or 5 stories, but we will figure that out as project engineering advances. Lastly, you said you're not excited for the duration of the project. Again, 7 years seems like a long time. I think if you look at any other similar project, whether it's the Silver Line project, any other project of this magnitude, I don't think is going to be constructed. These things don't happen overnight. We're talking about 30 plus linear infrastructure miles, 3 major stations, a train set maintenance facility, and 4 substations. 7 years to construct that is pretty aggressive. And lastly, you said you don't like that this is a private project. Again, I would offer that if DOT had an appetite to actually build a project, that'd be great. But that's not the business they're in. They're a regulator and a manager of financing for projects and grants for projects. They don't build projects. They are a part owner of Amtrak. They don't build Amtrak. So the federal government is not, they are not proposing to introduce high-speed rail in this country. They are looking to the private sector to help with that. And, we think we're fulfilling a very important role in meeting that need.
All right. Well, thanks, Chris, and thanks, Ian. Chris, I do see you've got your hand raised, but I think I just respecting people's time. I kind of wanted to. I said 8:30 in the beginning, and we're a little bit over that. So I'll say a few concluding remarks here. Thanks everyone from the community for coming by. As I said at the outset, being on a Zoom call about an infrastructure project until 8:30 p.m. is not most people's idea of a fun time, but it's important that the community had a chance to engage here and ask questions. Thank you, Ian. Thanks for the MAGLEV team for answering our questions. I want to remind everyone that if you have a further question, I'm happy to interface with Ian. My email is 6e05@anc.dc.gov. And I'm happy to ask that question on your behalf, or route, make sure the question gets to Ian and he can, provide you a written response to the question, just to make sure everyone's concerns and questions are heard. So thank you again for the session tonight. Everyone, I really appreciate your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening.